Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yami. I use they, them pronouns. I am also calling in from Treaty 13 today, land that has been loved and resisted on. Um, and as we speak, there's many things that are happening on these lands around resistance, whether it be the resettlement of African refugees, the ongoing fights of resistance around grassy narrows. So just holding really closely and tightly the different movements, and I'm sure there's many others that are calling for justice in this moment. I have a pair of red glasses with purple lipstick and wearing a black shirt. I am a dark skinned Black person with gold hoop earrings, and in the background, I have what I think is a banjo. I'm not sure, it's my partner, and some artwork that is, and then a bookshelf. So just giving you a description of yeah, of my background. And I work with the Ontario Nonprofit Network as the network engagement manager, and grateful to be in space with you all and be in conversation with our amazing panelists. For those who just joined us, welcome. The title of today's discussion is Applying a Disability Justice Lens to Transform Work and Workplaces. And the questions that we're really looking to explore is, what does it look like, feel like? What is it, how can we create workspaces that center access, care, community, that really put into practice equity, inclusion, and diversity, as well as anti-oppressive practices in terms of service delivery, as well as thinking about work. So this learning session lays a foundational understanding of AODA landscape and envisions the intersections of disability justice and decent work to build our capacity and to continue the capacity that's already being built. And our panelists can definitely speak to and reimagine concrete ways to transform our workspaces and workplaces. So without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, take about 2 to 3 minutes or so, just to really situate yourselves, and as well as, let folks know the work that you're doing in community, and a bit about you. So maybe I'll start over with you, Ingrid, if that works.
Thank you, Yami. Hello, everyone. My name is Ingrid Palmer. I am a social justice advocate, have been for over 10 years. I am also a speaker, an award-winning speaker, an author, and the founder of a business called Focus on Ability. I as well hold the position of Ideal Chief Officer at Realize, and Ideal is an acronym for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, Leading to Belonging. As a visually impaired former foster child, my life is really committed to combating discrimination in all its forms and to debunk myths and to participate actively in driving really important and meaningful systemic and social changes. My dedication is deeply rooted in my living experiences of Blackness, of being partially sighted, of growing up in the child welfare system, of gender-based violence. And my personal experiences and a lot of the adversity, barriers, and lack of access that I have experienced throughout my life is really the fuel that drives my work in social justice, because I am determined and would love to participate in creating a world and society where no one else would have to experience any of the things that I have, and even many of the things that I haven't, but that have um, had really detrimental effects on the lives of persons with disabilities and other identities that have been actively and consistently pushed to the margins by mainstream society. So it is always my pleasure to be in companionship and in community with individuals who share my commitment to growing and to learning and to participate in pushing the paradigm towards a more utopian world where everybody, regardless of how they identify, finds a place and is valued for who they are and for everything that they bring to the world. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank
Hello,
you.
everyone. My name is Zara Brown. I am glad to be part of this discussion. I am hard of hearing. I am Black. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing this shirt. My background is blurry. I am what I do for a living. I am a Toronto District School Board vendor where I conduct workshops to high school students to ensure students with disabilities can self-advocate themselves when they are going into post-secondary education, whether it is university or college. And it is, the concept came from my thesis that I did at York University doing my critical disability studies masters, where I feel I use my experiences in going through these post-secondary different institutions through accommodation. Then I wanted to give that is me giving back to the community. And so I want to make sure that these high school students understand the importance of self-advocating themselves when they are seeking accommodation through their choice of school that they want to go to. That's it.
Thank you so much, Zara. And I'll hand it over to you, Rabia.
Thank you, Yemi, and thank you, fellow panelists and the hosts and everybody out there attending. My name is Rabia Khidr. I often describe myself as a hyphen with many hijabs. I am, my one-liner is that I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, daughter of aging parents, sibling of individuals with disabilities, activist, advocate, a couple of new privileged terms that I've stolen or I'm occupying are social entrepreneur and systems disruptor, and I happen to have a disability. I bring this package of identity in terms of my lived experience to all the work that I do. I didn't set out to become an advocate, but being born with a eye condition that eventually reduced my vision to blindness, the journey that I took required that I learn to self-advocate. I come from a family that migrated here, so I'm an immigrant child, and as the immigrant child who mastered the language faster than her parents and learned the system, I ended up being the advocate for my family, for my siblings, for my parents, for everyone around me. And this journey eventually, brought me forward to saying, okay, I have enough disability personally. I'm not going to make a profession out of it. And yet that's where I am. That's where I ended up being. I have established organizations. I've served on boards and committees. I've volunteered in all kinds of spaces and places. My disability justice roots came out of ERDCO, Ethno-Racial People with Disabilities Coalition of Ontario, that looked at the layers of disadvantage that we face when we have all these identity markers of race, gender, faith, age, um, et cetera, and disability. And I ended up working in mainstream service providing organizations, and then establishing community-based organizations. I've served on accessibility advisory committees and whatnot, locally, provincially, and nationally, and went back and did a master's in critical disability studies, again, to spotlight that intersectional piece of, to inform the work that I'm doing in the community already. And it was entitled, my paper was entitled Portraits of Muslim Adults with Intellectual Disabilities and Their Families Living in Ontario. And that's because I grew up with brothers with intellectual disabilities, and we fell through the cracks regardless of my advocacy skills. We faced discrimination and racism and all of that isms packaged together in many silos of services. And today, I am the National Director of Disability Without Poverty, building a national movement, grassroots from coast to coast to coast, to end disability poverty. And I also run Dean Support Services and founded Race and Disability Canada. I'm speaking to you from Mississauga, Ontario, the most recently the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I'm a mom of 4 adults, married, and as I said, daughter to aging parents. I live, eat, and breathe disability rights, and I always say that every obstacle is an opportunity, and I don't waste time seeing, I spend time doing so. I'm in the trenches, problem solving wherever I can, mentoring whoever I can, and just with a vision of a truly inclusive society for racialized people with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful introductions. This is Yami speaking. I'm so incredibly grateful to be in space with you all today. And just want to remind folks that closed captioning is enabled, and so that is accessible, and we'll also put that in the chat as well. So let's dive in to the questions. When we were prepping for this panel, I made a joke that everyone has a connection to York University on this panel, which is York, send coin some way to the nonprofits. Just kidding, but not really. And so to start off, I really want us to, I guess the first question, and I'll hand it over to Ingrid to start us off, is what does it look like? And I remember, Ingrid, you and I did a podcast on disability justice, I think 2 years ago. And we looked at this question in terms of what does it feel like? How do organizations apply a disability justice principles to the design of work environments and service delivery? And Sri offered a framing of disability justice. And so we'll also share the Sins Invalid link again for folks who want to learn more. So hand it over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Yami. I don't remember what I said a couple of years ago, but currently, when I dream about workplace culture that lovingly embraces disability justice principles, and I'm thinking about a place that is actively confronting ableism as a key strategic priority, and one that is actively and continuously addressing bias, harassment, and is putting a premium on mental health and wellness, and that is also encouraging employees to make use of those benefits. I'm thinking about a place where accommodations are known to not be special treatment, where the leadership is actively promoting pride in asking for help and for showing vulnerability, which is drastically different from the cultures that most people are working in. And when we are talking or contemplating intersectionality, then I'm thinking about a place where that recognizes that their employees with disabilities are not just that, that people with disability have other components to their identities that also impact how we are able to navigate the world, both socially and systemically. And then that place will also actively be ensuring that they are taking note of their employees with disabilities, and also understanding that that people who face oppression in one way can still hold privilege in other ways. And so understanding that an employee with a disability who identifies as a cis white male and with a visible disability, while still facing discrimination and stigmatization, also still holds privileged experiences over another person with an invisible disability who is also a racialized person, perhaps identifying as non-binary. And so that those experiences are different, because in a lot of ways, people still have this monolithic view to disability as if we all experience the same things, and that is absolutely not true. I also think about the necessity of elevating the lived experience of people with disabilities into leadership, particularly senior level leadership, where there is still a huge gap for people with disability. I think about an increased recognition of contribution of employees with disabilities, and ensuring that that those contributions are being attributed to people with disabilities, because a lot of times the work of employees with disabilities is appropriated to usually someone without a disability, as if it's impossible for an employee with a disability to have been, creative or innovative, or to have led something. And particularly moving away from constructs of productivity and towards, paying more attention to what the outcomes of that productivity is, because we really need to change the perspective on being productive and what it looks like now, because that's really structured around colonious methods, where a lot of times people with disabilities in the workplace are undermined and being forced to conform to neurotypical structures of what productivity looks like. And that goes a long way. That will cause somebody to um, perhaps unintentionally be ableist in their attempts to support somebody with a disability, because that misconstrued mindset of what it means to be productive, to be disciplined, will lead someone to, perhaps use toxic positivity and say, unhelpful things like, oh, well, if you only do things this way, or any sentence that begins with at least, or if you only tried harder, this and this would happen, or you would see more results, instead of recognizing that we need to have more flexibility and more ownership by employees of how work gets done. And around times of work and these other constructs that benefit people without disability, but that don't really look to the possibility and the value of the contribution that someone can give who's facing either long-term disability or episodic disabilities, where they experience periods of wellness and periods of unwellness. So if we can move beyond this tendency to push people in what we feel is the right direction, instead of giving people optimal amount of choices in how they can get their work done instead. And I don't want to take up too much time, but those are my initial thoughts when I envision my dream workplace that actively embraces disability justice principles.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for that. I think you really have started to touch on, some of the 10 principles of disability justice, intersectionality, looking at an anti-capitalist
Yeah.
politic that interrogates productivity, as well as recognizing wholeness of who we are as people, us being inherently valuable.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And I'll hand it over to either Zara or Rabia.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's really important for us to understand what leadership looks like, because I think we fall into the trap of talking a lot. We're not doing much um, action-based information where we can just be like show an example that people with disabilities can lead. So when it comes to hiring, you need to hire people with disabilities to show the leadership. Because if we don't allow people to, we're hiring people who are not we're hiring non-disabled people to take on these leadership roles, and that affects the workplace. So when customers and employers enter into these workplaces, it doesn't reflect on us. I think the only thing we need to look at to reflect on the principle is to be an example, like hire employees with disabilities to take on these leadership roles and allow them to shine in these workplaces, because that would challenge everything. That would allow workplaces to understand what inclusion looks like, and really do the groundwork, because we're looking at the action-based solution rather than just talking and just influencing people, because influencing people isn't really doing its work. You get what I mean? I think it's really important for us to stay committed with hiring people with disabilities in these leadership roles, and also I put some value. We need to put a lot of value in collective access. What I mean by collective access, we have to be mindful that every person with disability, that we all have different needs. We all have different accommodation needs. So we cannot put our needs under one umbrella and then just assume that the work has been done. And that's not the case. I think we need to normalize a space where it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to ask for accommodation for us to do the job well, to perform well, and not have to be in a situation where you feel like you are feeling ashamed of, because you're working differently than your other coworkers, and that attitude is coming from, it's rooted in ableism. And so if we can all just look at the hiring and management and how we hire people and represent how these our workplaces represent our culture, and understand that our needs are different, and it is okay to have multiple and different needs, and just connect, build a relationship within our workplaces in order for us to grow into a place that we envision ourselves to be, that represent disability justice. You know what I mean? So I think if we value and stay committed to accommodation, accessibility, and see the need for people with disabilities, be in the lead in these offices, in these employees, in these employment sector. Because, for example, I went to Taiwan last month, and I've never seen, we went to Taiwan last month, and it was like a Christian-based trip where we are looking at LGBTQ people in churches and whatnot. But in these trips, I've seen people who are giving lectures and giving us tours, and these people who are leading these tours and who are leading these conversations are people with disabilities. So as a person who is hard of hearing and who has cerebral palsy, to see somebody in leadership in these roles can make a difference. I think it's really, we cannot bypass that. This is why we need to look at how we describe our job descriptions when we are hiring people, and let them know that, and pay attention to the language that we are using to describe these jobs, so that the people who are looking for these jobs are not feeling intimidated because how ableist the job description is in the job searching environment. So I think if we are going to reflect on the disability justice principle, we also have to look at the hiring process. We have to look at being an example of showing, giving roles, different roles to people with disability, and let them have a chance to do the job, and allow them to have access to accommodation, and not be ashamed of asking for it. And we have to respect their privacies. And so we need to get onto that habit of not being too ableist and get caught up in the capitalist environment, what causes everybody to forget about how to treat people and be more inclusive. We all have these different laws and different human rights laws about accommodation, accessibility, and disability acts, but yet we are still not understanding how to incorporate these laws into our workplaces. And I think it's because we are not hiring people with different needs, people with different disabilities to do the roles. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Zara. Lots of rich perspectives, and I think I'll come back to it, but I want to hand it over to Rabia before I do.
Yanni, could you just give me a quick rundown of the question again?
Absolutely. So the question again is, what does it look like when we apply, feel like when we apply disability justice principles to the design of workplace environments and the delivery of services and programming. And so welcome any examples of that. And I know that there's a request for some tangible examples that folks can lean into.
Well, when we apply principles and when we're talking about disability justice principles, we're talking about creating a corporate culture that embraces the inclusion of people with disabilities, whether as service recipients or as service providers throughout the organization. We recognize that there are laws of the land that govern specific accessibility requirements that we're obligated to, and we wholeheartedly implement those, not just by the letter of the law, but with the intent of the law. Under the Human Rights Code, for example, ensuring that we're addressing all the prohibited grounds to ensure that sort of intersectional approach to job opportunities within the space that we control for everyone, including people with disabilities. We implement, sort of, I'm going to use an old term, affirmative action strategies to make sure that we're opening the door for people with disabilities to come in and participate. In our hiring and retention strategies, in our service models, we're applying universal design principles. We minimize barriers. I don't believe in perfection, so we can never design something that is absolutely perfect, simply because disabled people experience their disabilities or disablement very differently. The barriers they experience aren't the same. For example, the eye condition I have, congenital Leber's amaurosis, my sister has the same eye condition. She's 11 years or so younger than me. Her lived experience started from birth here in Mississauga. Mine came through migration. So my lived experience has shaped who I am and what I need to be fully engaged and accommodated. So her lived experience is slightly different. We picked different career paths. We use different language about our disability. I say I'm blind. She still uses visually impaired. I reject the impairment word. I never applied it to me because my thing around language is, around impairment is, well, if I was just impaired, I could be detoxed. And impaired is more the medical terminology around vision loss. To me, it's about having low or no vision. So our accommodations are not the same. I depend on screen readers. I'm a heavy JAWS user. She still tries to use Zoom text and things like that. So our technological accommodations are different. Although, at this stage she sees very little, she still uses that term, like I said, visually impaired. Whereas I, just say straight up, I'm blind because that's what I am. I have no light perception at this point, hardly. So no two people, even within the same family, experience their disabilities exactly the same, even if it's the same diagnosis. So we have to create that kind of, we have to apply universal design principles to ensure that we're minimizing barriers, but there will always be a need for accommodation. So we ensure that our environment is accessible and allows people in, whether it's to be employed or to be served and supported. But we also have to be prepared to keep the door open for conversations and negotiations around the need for accommodation that some people might have, accommodation requirements that some people might have, because we just cannot predict everything. So to me, really, it's about create that inclusive culture. And not only is it about that service recipient, service provider relationship. Not only is it about that employer-employee relationship and, the work that goes along within those two relationships, whether it's about, the tasks and the tools used in those relationships, it goes way beyond that. It also goes toward the idea of social inclusion. So how are people accommodated in the informal structures of the environment? How do we create space for people to fully belong through informal, opportunities, whether it's lunchtime conversations, it's breaks, it's social events, it's team building activities, it's celebrations and traditions. How do we embrace again wholeheartedly inclusive culture in that way within our organization to ensure that everybody can fully benefit?
Thank you so much, Rabia. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for your deep insights. I have taken so many practical ways that folks can be thinking about applying disability justice principles, and want to continue that. I heard all of you speak to this in terms of kind of rethinking the way that, for example, Zara, you were talking about hiring processes. And one of the things as part of the Decent Work project that we came across was the need to move away from just the written word and thinking about, using different modalities to submit a cover letter or a resume that aren't just written, that invite space for folks who communicate differently. And so I'm curious if we can lean into that in terms of thinking about what actions and what do you see on the horizon for change? What are some I love the framing of wise practices or promising practices that folks on this call can be leaning into, because as you said, Zara, as you said, Ingrid, as you said, Rabia, the default is going to be an ableist structure. And, it's not just about thinking about it in terms of accommodations, which are important, but also those social aspects of integration. And we often do default to an ableist way of being in workplaces. That's how many workplaces, not all, have been socialized. And so maybe we can start with you, Zara, in terms of thinking about what you see on the horizon. What are some promising practices? What are things that folks can implement today? And I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. I think that I can only speak on my experience, and I can only advocate my disability. So I have my cerebral palsy, and I am hard of hearing. I have a hearing loss. I think the main issue I would like to bring up is the way we communicate. So, for example, if we're looking for a job, the first thing they say in the job description is, call us at this number. It's all through audio, it's through listening, and there's no other way, right? And so it's like you have to call in and say, hey, listen, I can't really. I'd rather do a Zoom meeting because I'm a lip reader, and so the awareness people with hearing loss get dismissed. I feel that if we are, if most employers just look into the AODA, look into the deaf and hard of hearing community, understand the human rights, and understand how do they communicate and operate around people. And so if we can use different techniques in the way we communicate because of our differences, might make a difference. For some of us, when I mean by us, I'm speaking for the deaf culture as well. Because some of us, the language isn't read. You have to communicate through American Sign Language. You have to use ASL to what you have on the website, what you have written. Some of us don't understand what's on that written piece of paper or that section. So that section has to be translated in video, has to be translated in ASL. So it's a lot. It's a lot, but I think the lack of awareness of understanding how do we make our information accessible for a particular type of disability in terms of deaf and hard of hearing folks, it's different. For me, I would have to have a Zoom meeting and I have to meet you in person. I don't need an ASI interpreter, but for some of us, we do. So it's really important not to put us under one umbrella because everybody's needs is different. But the awareness needs to be out there. Just pretty much do your research because the disability community is a huge community, and I understand that it's a lot to take in, but take the initiative and knowing what type of audience are you looking for, what type of people you want to be represented at your workplace. But when we're talking about being inclusive, we have to understand inclusive is just a huge word. So it's a lot. Well, it does not mean that it can be, it shouldn't be something for us to be intimidated by. We shouldn't be intimidated by something that we don't, the world, the ableist world that they are not familiarized with. We have to go into the unknown. You have to do the work. If you gotta call somebody in the deaf community, in the deaf spaces, or hard of hearing spaces, then do so. And get some, like, you gotta have some collaboration. I think collaboration with one agency and your agency can work together. They can help make this happen, make the space more inclusive and make the hiring process more accessible for the audience you're trying to take on.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You're absolutely right, you know, in terms of things that folks should be thinking about is the differences that exist within the umbrella of what it means to create an accessible space. As someone who's autistic and verbal, like, what does it mean? Like, my needs are completely different than somebody else's. You know, don't ask me to write notes. I'm not the one, you know, don't ask me to write things down. You know, I'm very much stronger orally. And so I think that that invitation to complexify even the singular experiences that we have, as you and Rabia have pointed out. And so I'm gonna hand it over to you, Ingrid, to share, and a reminder of the question is to, you know, examine, you know, what actions folks can take within their organizations and what can be on the horizon, or what is on the horizon. Yeah.
Thank you, Yami. And just thinking about some of the conversation that happened already and building on that is where I'm going to start. And I was just thinking about how you first started when you led into this question about the interview process and expanding on that. What came to my mind was, yes, about perhaps moving away from the traditional, you know, cover letter and resume and being open to people applying through video. The real important aspect of inclusion that organizations need to embrace is that choice, and the increase of choice is what brings that about for people with disabilities. You know, a lot of times um, when inclusion is first enacted, it's like there's only one way. So when we think of perhaps trying to get into a building, that building will have like one entrance that's accessible. Whereas people without disabilities have like 6 doors. They have 6 different ways or you know, areas that they can enter a building from, and people with disability maybe only have one. And so getting creative about increasing choice for people with disability is really, really important, and not just stopping at, okay, we've done one thing, so we're good now. But in every aspect of what you do, how can you increase the level of choice that people have, and so that people can choose the method that's best for them? And in one way, I really am always trying in my conversations to move away from focusing just on people with disability, because everything for people with disabilities is good for everybody. There is nothing that has been created or accommodation that has been fought for people with disability that is not used by everybody. Nothing at all. And so if we can just really start normalizing the conversation for everybody, instead of we always tend to focus on, you know, accommodations or specific things for people with disabilities, when it really is just an everybody thing, and increasing choices so that everybody has an area or an avenue or a choice for what works best for them. So I think really starting to wrap our minds around increasing choice in every area, whether it's how we can apply for positions, or how we can navigate within our positions, how we can do our work, how we can have more ownership over our work, and so increasing choices in all those areas is really going to work to you know, expand inclusion. I also really want to bring in a really important concept that is just always important in every conversation around inclusion, diversity, and disability justice, is the term of interdependence. And you know, when we think about you know, people with disability, um, you know, the focus is usually on, you know, accommodations for that particular person, and not really looking on, like, as I said again, the whole, that absolutely everybody has areas in which we excel in which we are strong in, and absolutely everybody has areas of need where we need support. It is not just people with disabilities, and we need to move away from focusing as people with disabilities as always being the ones in need, because that is absolutely not true. People with disabilities are leaders, you know, are drivers of innovation. And it's really important to recognize that nobody is truly independent. We all have areas of need that we need mentorship in, that we need support in, that we need to grow in, and we have those areas where we excel in. And so when we can just recognize that everybody has rights to accommodation, that everybody needs increase in choices, that people with disabilities and people without disabilities have areas where we lead in, where we excel in, and we also have areas that we need support in. Like, that is a focus that we can just please move to, just looking at our societies, our communities, our employees as a whole, and not necessarily needing to separate out people with disabilities. It's really there's a tension there for me, because it's like, yes, we need specific accommodation. We really need to think of people with disabilities because we have been left out of conversations. We have not been thought of. And at the same time, though, I want us to be folded into the mainstream seamlessly. And so where we're always thinking of everybody as we, and recognizing that as a whole, we are diverse, and as a whole, we have different needs, and really just starting to look at our community holistically with everybody included, and not having to continuously section ourselves out into different labels. And that's a real point of tension for me, even as I'm saying it, because at the same time, I know that we have to have focus, because individuals have been deliberately pushed to the margins, and we have to focus on bringing equity in. And at the same time, though, I want us to be able to look at our world with everybody in it, and everybody thought of all the time. The other step that I really want is that conversations need to elevate or to expand um, in terms of decent work, away from, not away, but expand out beyond accommodation and towards acceleration and advancement. And that's where I spoke before about, and others on the panel, Rabia and Zara, also spoke about the lack of representation of people with disabilities in leadership position, and that extra particular effort and money and deliberate funding really needs to be put towards the next transition in equity, which requires the move towards presence, visibility of employees with disabilities wielding power, leading. Um, that's a must, and that is the next frontier, that we can't stop at accommodation, that we really need to continue that conversation, but also continuously be pushing outward and be looking at elevation. And Tim Rose, who is the inclusion expert, I believe, at CNIB, and I've been stealing his phrase because from the first time I heard him use it, I loved it. And he talks about the need to turn the corporate ladder into a corporate ramp. And it just resonated so much with me when he said that. And I love repeating that and expanding that concept out there, because that is it exactly. Turning that elevation process into an equitable process, because we have a lot more diversity at frontline and entry level, and even some mid-management positions, but we certainly are not seeing enough in senior positions, and we really need to escalate that. And I see a great need for that support to come internally. And how can allies do this in the workplace? Well, I believe in really promoting and taking notice of your colleagues, saying their name, pointing out the great contributions that they're doing in your workplace, bringing their notice to the establishment, to the leadership, and really elevating their presence with your voice. That is a great step in allyship. And I also really want to hear and to see those allied voices right beside us and alongside of us loud. Like, we have this tendency on certain special days, like International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and then everyone's on social media and they're making these posts and they're doing those things. But what are you doing on the everyday? That's where the real importance comes in. Like, making a post like is all great, but are you out there on marches? Is your voice being heard alongside people with disabilities and your colleagues with disabilities? Are you speaking up? Are you visible in that support? I think that that's really, really important. And when people are looking for ways in which they can participate in increasing equity and increasing inclusion in the workplace, I think those are really good places to start. And also stepping back. Sometimes being quiet and just shutting up is an incredible act of allyship, and an incredible way to elevate the voices and the visibility of your colleagues with disability. And so I think that's also incredibly important.
Thank you so much, and great to have me here. I love that just getting out of the way, stepping back. And so I'll invite Ravia for you to share, and then we're going to take a quick break. And during that break, if folks want to think about questions that you would like to address to the panelists, now's the time to take a quick thinking moment to put that down. We'll take a quick break, but first, before we do, Ravia, please.
Okay, sorry, I'm just going to ask you to restate the question for everybody's benefit to remind people.
Absolutely. So the last question was around what actions folks within organizations can take, and what do you see on the horizon?
So again, a lot of times organizations do diversity and inclusion work, and that diversity and inclusion work is really like an add-on. It's a checkbox. It's not wholehearted. So it's not intentional culture change in the organization. It's, we got some extra pocket change, so we're going to do a little work on diversity and just say we've done it. And the actions taken often are strictly performative, which means, we, put out a social media post and have a celebration or raise the flag or whatever we do. It's very symbolic. It's performative. It's smoke and mirrors. It's makeup. It's not real. It's not substantive. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. It's not wholehearted. Systems change, institutional change, culture change can only happen if everybody's involved equally. Lived experience of people with disabilities has to be central. As I mentioned earlier, not two people have the exact same accommodation needs or accessibility needs. And there has to be buy-in from the leadership of the organization. Many a times, large-scale organizations have their EDI work, so their, equity, diversity, inclusion work happening, but because there's legislation for accessibility, they do all the accessibility work on the side separately because they're following some of the processes and best practices outlined by the legislation and its standards to formulate accessibility plans. But they're not, so they're kind of doing the work in two separate silos. Inclusion means all of it. Equity-seeking groups, all of them. It begins with using the right language and terminology and consulting people to establish that language and terminology, not just looking at academia and what they're debating. For example, I have a real big pet peeve with equity-deserving communities or groups. We don't deserve equity. We demand it. We seek it, we demand it. So equity seeking or equity demanding over deserving. When it comes to, again, around equity, like, again, it's people with privilege who adopt extreme measures of political correctness, for example. And, in the spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, they look at, oh, we're going to rename the Christmas tree to a holiday tree. Again, this is all smoke and mirrors. This is not genuine. This is not authentic. This is not fostering an environment of belonging for everybody. So if we are to advance accessibility, to implement universal design, to ensure that all people with disabilities fully participate within the organization in terms of hiring, promotion, retention, the sense of team and connectivity to the organization and its cause, then we have to transform our culture meaningfully with senior leadership involvement and with the involvement of lived experience at the center. So again, not just the letter of the law, but the intent of the law. The letter of the law for accessibility, historically, when the legislation was introduced, there's a big, joke about it, because one of our major academic institutions circulated a pamphlet and said they had done work on accessibility. That's one little symbolic gesture. That's the checkbox. That's not intentional. It's not authentic. It's actually not even relevant. So if we are to truly transform organizations, we take performative actions, but we also take substantive actions, engaging lived experience and the institutional power that we have in various positions, together in the spirit of equity, to establish policies, practices, and values that genuinely ensure that people with disabilities, employees with disabilities, supervisors, managers are all fully accessing not only the physical environment of the organization, but are reflected in the entire culture of the organization.
Thank you so much, everyone. So much wisdom, so much. I've been frantically, not frantically, but I've been taking notes, and really appreciate all the wisdom and your expression of lived experience, and just really centering that in the space today. And I just want to take a moment before we go on a short break. And again, this is Yami speaking, to call attention to some comments in the chat. And so just want to read out Corinne's comment around society has labeled everyone, and I wonder the persons who are being labeled as normal, and are they really normal? And are those who are labeled as persons with disability, are they really persons with disability? For all I know, it could be the other way around. And an invitation from Sri that culture change is crucial, centering those values. Rebecca, very grateful to be hearing this incredible insight. Thank you so much. And Sri, again, accommodation, for consideration, accommodation versus accessibility. So everyone, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll move into question and answer period. So if you do have a question, you can direct it to Sarna in the chat, or we'll invite you to unmic yourself and share that question if that's something that's more accessible for you in terms of communication. And so let's come back at 3:47, if that's okay with folks, and just take a quick break. Thank you. And Sri, I think we can pause recording. That's while we take the break, if that works.
When we're trying, even when we're trying to remove it, we're still participating in it. Anyway, I'm curious to know.
I can jump in here, Yanmi. Is that okay?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So in terms of, really getting people on board with accessibility work, I think, we get tired of it, but we know we constantly need to educate people. Even within specific equity demanding groups, equity seeking groups, there's always this sense of hierarchy that, and it's that hierarchy of oppression, like we are more oppressed than you are. And that can be amongst groups, and that can be within specific groups. So we know that within the disability community, we have this hierarchy around disability. Who thinks they are the most excluded and generally, you know, like for example, people with intellectual disabilities are probably the most excluded, even within disability spaces, um, by other disabled people. So it's a tricky space to be in, but it begins with education and awareness raising, and that education and awareness raising has to be ongoing. It can't be a one-off. Um, if you run a workshop in a workplace once to educate people, to raise awareness amongst people about accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities, you know, the EDI folks and whatnot tend to forget. We constantly need to be educating and re-educating, and helping them identify who around them is disabled or may be disabled. I used to do a very basic exercise a long time ago when I used to train supportive housing folks, and it was around values and, you know, under their value and recognition of disability at a young age toward how do they imagine themselves in you know, at age 99 if they live that long. And everybody imagined themselves having some form of disability or other, because they just see that as symbolically relevant to aging, and giving them that uh, introspection to really, you know, position accessibility work then can help with that transformation.
If I could jump in, and just to build on what was said, that was a great question, Fran, and I completely agree with you, Rabia, around the necessity of continuous education. And I think that if we can always position the workplace as a place of continuous learning, and where um, we're learning together and collectively, like just as we're learning today, um, because that places everybody as joint stewards of justice for everyone. And as both Zara and Rabia commented on earlier, that even within um, the same form of disabilities, or even within the larger disability community, there is so much to learn. And this disability justice is not just for people without disabilities, it's for people with disabilities too, because we also have so much to learn. And there are ways, and there, like, ableism is rampant within the disability community as well. And so that we have to look at uh, disability justice as continuous and lifelong learning. Like, this is not going to stop, and we have to be open to that, and knowing that we have to continuously create opportunities for us to come together, both formally and informally, and share our experiences, and to learn and to understand around one another. And as you know, in your question, Fran, when you were talking about people who are temporarily disabled, that is an optimal opportunity for learning, and to bring use their current experience to expand their learning and understanding of people with chronic disability and people with episodic disability. And so we know that when people see themselves reflected within the training and within the workshops that are happening within their workplaces, and having you know, a variety of experiences explained to others who might not know about them, or even for people who are experiencing them, to see their situation reflected in learning, that builds trust within organizations, that builds confidence, that builds security. And we know that so many people don't disclose their disability for valid reasons of being judged, of being you know, unfairly penalized, or looked at differently because they disclose that they have a disability. So when we can turn our workspaces into this continuous learning environment, I truly believe that that will in itself build and lead to a willingness for people to be more open about their needs. And I think one of my first comments was about when I was envisioning, this ideal workplace. It was about, I remember saying something about leadership promoting the environment as a place where it is beautiful to ask for help and to be vulnerable, which is not what we experience now. Those are things that we are taught to hide. So if we can increase this workplace culture where it's actually a beautiful thing to say, I need help today, now, in this way, all the time, or I am not feeling well today, or am I experiencing this, or this is happening to me. And that is something that is received with love and support instead of like something to be scorned or dismissed or looked down upon. Then that is going to build and enforce this culture of appreciation and love and acceptance and respect. And I believe that opportunities like this need to be multiplied and will factor heavily in creating that type of environment where we learn about each other and we respect one another and we embrace the realities of all of our lives, and we don't feel that we have to mask so much of ourselves and what we're going through and what we're experiencing. If we can just truly build that in that environment and that world where we all can actually be, and our individual and collective experiences can be embraced and jointly held in loving ways, that we will move towards this place where we can just be accepting of everyone. I'm sorry, I feel like I rambled a bit there,
Thank you
but
so much.
that is my dream.
And
That's my dream.
And so thank you so much, Ingrid. I know that we are almost at time, and Zara, I'm gonna ask you to respond to this last question here. And we may go just a little over, so if folks have to drop off. Again, this is Yami speaking, totally respect that, want to honor your time. But one last question that came in was, I'd love for the panel, sorry, I'm going to read this. I'd love to ask the panel for their insight on how/where to advertise and post roles to encourage and facilitate the broad application for roles at all levels, frontline management, etc. So Zara, I'll pose that question to you if there are any insights on how to do outreach around
you
roles.
should, I think you should, it's important to ask yourself one question. How do you want your information to be shared, and if it's accessible? So if you're going to advertise, you might want to try to advertise to a company that you are unfamiliar with. So if you're going to advertise something that's for the blind or for the deaf, take the risk to do it and see the outcome of it, because we are so consumed with fear. We don't want to be too comfortable in fear. So I think it's okay to do something new. Go out of your way, try different things, that try and interact with an agency, a disability agency that you're not familiar with, and collect information from them and try to engage with them in terms of advertising the work that you want to share. And sharing information needs to be accessible. Is it accessible for this particular audience? How do I make it better for us to engage with that audience? There gotta be there's so many ways to seek information. It's not just one way. We have other choices.
Thank you for that. So I know that we are at time though. Again, this is Yami speaking. I just want to express a deep amount of gratitude to Zara, Rabia, and Ingrid, as well as Suri and Sarna for your stewardship around this conversation and continued stewardship. We will have further sessions that will continue to engage in discussions around accessibility and within the employment services. So deeply appreciate again everyone showing up today. I hope you take a moment to take care of yourselves, whatever that looks like, before you move into the next thing. Slowing down, knowing that you are valuable just as you are, not for what you do, but just who you are, period. And appreciate you all so, so much.